Last week, voters sent a message. Energy prices are too high, and they trust Democrats to do something about them. In races up and down the ballot, Democrats have been building momentum by running on affordability as Trump's economic agenda continues to skyrocket the cost of living. So today, we're excited to have Governor Jay Inslee back to talk about the state of Trump's utility cost crisis and how Democrats are fighting back, what this could mean for future elections to come. So Governor Jay Inslee, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's a beautiful day across America. People are waking up.
I love it. Now, okay, let's talk about last week's elections. We know that it was a Democratic sweep, and we saw Democratic candidates from New Jersey to Virginia to Georgia have historically successful results. And the common theme amongst all of these campaigns was affordability, especially the skyrocketing cost of utilities like electricity. Can you talk to us about some of these success stories and what the candidates did that really resonated with voters?
Yeah, well, first off, it was really an astounding election. I've been in elections off and on for 30 years, and this one is one of the most uh, persuasive, powerful smack in the nose of one party I've ever seen. It was a huge rejection of Trump energy policies. And I really, you can always look at an election through your own lens, but I think it's fair to say this was a referendum on Trump's and the Republicans' horrendous inflation causing, climate causing energy policies, because it was consistent across so many different races. Every race is unique to some degree, but they almost all of the big, huge Democratic wins had one thing in common, and that was the fact that we attacked on an offensive, aggressive way the antediluvian, brain dead energy policies of Trump and the Republicans. And that was consistent in New Jersey and Virginia and the Georgia races, and in effect in the redistricting in California. They all had this in common, which is people have had a bellyful of the inflation that Trump's policies is causing when it comes to electrical prices. In New Jersey, they'd experienced 22% increase since Trump had been elected. In Virginia, it was 11%. In Virginia, people had 540 dollar increases each of the last 2 years. And our candidates, bless their hearts, went out there very powerfully and forcefully and aggressively went out and said, this will not stand. And they basically presented their own energy policies that would give Americans less expensive electricity by focusing on the electrical generating systems that we know are the cheapest, which are solar, wind, batteries, efficiency, and not allow the utility companies to run roughshod over consumers. And so it was a very consistent message across multiple geographies and multiple candidates, and all of them, people, just stomped on the Republicans because people understood it makes no sense to deny Americans access to the cheapest sources of energy, which are right now solar, wind, and advanced batteries. 93% of all the new electrical generating capacity in the United States last year were these three renewable energy sources because they're the cheapest.
Yeah.
And Trump and the Republicans have tried to take these sources of energy away from Americans in a corrupt scheme. And I use that term advisedly. The fossil fuel guys came in and gave Trump $1 billion. And we know why they did it, because they didn't like competing with cheaper sources of energy. So they gave him $1 billion and said, hey, Donald, why don't you kill our competitors and we'll have a new monopoly? And he's paying them off. They're getting what they bargained for. And Americans don't like that. They spoke.
Yeah, you mentioned Democrats going really aggressively and fighting on offense for this. One of the clips that I remember is when Mikey Sherrill, the now governor-elect for New Jersey, she said, "You know what? When I come in, I'm gonna really address the cost of electricity, the electricity crisis." And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, she said she was gonna require a state of emergency for this because prices were so high. And the other stat that people aren't talking about as much, obviously we're following the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, but in Georgia, the Georgia Public Service Commission, these two individuals that won were the first Democrats in Georgia to win non-federal statewide races in 20 years. and they ran on lowering the cost of electricity. Like, talk about these examples and how our candidates really understood that people are seeing their electricity bills go up. It's not good for our climate, and they won on that.
Well, there's two things that stood out to me on this. First off, the Georgia races, I think actually are maybe the most exciting races because they were in Georgia. We hadn't won, races for statewide races there like in 40 years in Georgia. And the fact that these two people came out of nowhere to beat incumbents is an incredibly powerful testament to the power of these messages. And they, of course, ran on a singular focus on this issue. Those two races, I think, are exhibits A and B about why these are clean energy is such a powerful message and resonated so strongly. And each of them just said, look, we've had a belly full allowing these utilities to run over us and forcing us to accept bad policies. So I think the Georgia races are maybe the most singularly powerful and showing the salience of this issue. But the other thing is of interest to me is that in the other races in New Jersey and Virginia, energy was not just some sort of sideline that got mentioned once in a debate. It was the meat of the campaign. So in New Jersey, the Republicans spent millions of dollars attacking Mikey on clean energy, made it an issue. Mikey came right back there and said, yes, we ought to have an emergency. We ought to take emergency action, and just took that right on into the teeth of the gale.
Yeah.
Spanberger in Virginia did the same thing. She ran several $1 million of ads about the necessity to have an aggressive energy policy. And I think she has some really interesting ideas about how to make sure that, the cost of data centers do not get put on consumers across the board. So in each of these races, these were not peripheral issues. They were the heart and center of the debate. And that's really never kind of happened before. This is sort of the first time in American history, political history, where energy had such a high profile, role. And I think that's healthy for America because it is such a central thing to our lives. It's central on the issue of inflation. It's central on electrical prices. It's central on food prices. 10 minutes ago, I was just having my first cup of coffee, and I was listening to the radio talking about how coffee prices have gone up like 30%. And the reason is climate change is making it impossible to grow coffee in some elevations.
Wow.
And now our coffee supplies are being threatened by climate change. So energy is central first off in the first order of our electrical prices on what it costs for utility bills, but it's also becoming central in our food prices on what it's doing to make it more difficult to grow our crops. So there's really a good and bad on this. A lot of these things are sort of, I guess you could say, between Democrats and Republicans. There's some gray zones. There's no gray zone on this. There's a party that understands science. There's a party that understands economics. There's a party that understands kitchen table issues. That's Democrats, because we have brought forth a vision for the future that is based on less expensive electricity, more clean energy, less asthma, less climate change gases. That's a clear vision that Americans really got behind last Tuesday.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned there's no gray area here, but you do have Republicans who are having to answer to these skyrocketing costs. And for us, it's the question is, how do we make sure that we focus on the fact that Republicans are behind some of these horrible policies and these skyrocketing costs? How do we keep that drumbeat going as Democrats?
Well, we find all of us one or two candidates for the House of Representatives we're going to support going into next November, because that's the salvation of the nation. And we're teed up well to do well in that regard. And all of these candidates, we hope, will follow Mikey and Abigail and our Georgia candidates to make it a central platform. And again, I think this is really important, to attack the opponent on this, not to defend, not to come in and defend, but to actually make it an issue on day one, because it does have that power. And I think that's sort of a new recognition in the Democratic Party. That's the way to do it. Now, they understand that the Republicans understand they're behind the eight ball in this. and they don't know what to do. Because Trump, his only response is to claim that prices are going down, which
Yeah.
is,
I mean, everybody knows
I saw
that's
a
not
headline the other
true.
day is Trump's lies finally going to catch up with him?
Yeah.
And I think that is true because, he can lie about a lot of things, tariffs and other things people don't understand, but they understand the price of electricity and the price of eggs. And now his response is, oh no, don't believe your lying eyes, believe me. Well,
Yeah.
that's not working for him. So they're in a world of hurt. And I guess the first rule of politics is when your opponent's down, don't let them get up. And so we intend to take that position.
Yeah. And I think those candidates that we saw win in a historic fashion that really did, as you mentioned, focus aggressively on the attack, on the offense when it comes to clean energy, jobs, electricity prices soaring. Keep going with that. Pick it up, carry it into this midterm year. It's very clear Democrats have the momentum and Republicans don't know how to respond. And the American people know that we are going to be the ones that address this crisis and not
The
Republicans.
interesting thing, too, about this is a unifying message because it affects all Americans of whatever ethnicity, whatever geography. When you look at the results, perhaps the most heartening thing is across ethnicity, we increased our performance, particularly with Hispanic folks. In New Jersey, it went up like 12, 14 points. A lot of folks that were Trump voters came over to the Democratic side by 8 or 9, 10 points. That is a huge shift. In fact, I don't know whether this is going to work or not, but I read one report that said some of the districts that, particularly in Texas, that they redistricted and gerrymandered, they gerrymandered it on the basis modeling Hispanic performance the way it was in 2024. Well, guess what? That world doesn't exist anymore
Yeah.
because if people are sick and tired of some of this horrendously abusive behavior by Trump, the threats to democracy, the inflation that he's stuffing down people's throats, and what was the term? They called it stupid Mandarin or something. Basically, they were arguing that it wasn't may not turn out to be a really good strategic play. And thank Gavin Newsom in California now to pushing back and get some more a fair map, so we don't allow Republicans to break the rules. So yes, things are going our way. It's unifying people across multiple groups. And this is something up and down the economic pyramid at all as well, but of course most around among working people, and people are catching on.
Yeah, I think we saw a new coalition start, as you mentioned, every demographic group
Yeah,
voted and swung for the Democrats, and
yeah.
it's
And
no
yet, the other
surprise.
thing about inflation, I hate to be fair to Trump. Like that would pain me ever to be fair to Trump. To some degree, sometimes inflation can be beyond the control of any president or any senator or congressperson. But you don't want to make the situation worse. And his policies have made this situation worse in at least two ways. First off, in electrical prices, he's taken the cheapest sources of energy, solar efficiency, batteries, and wind, and he's tried to destroy them and not allow Americans to have access to that cheaper source of energy. So he's made inflation worse on electrical prices. But he's also done it worse on his tariff and trade policies. And Americans really do understand this, that they're paying a tax on all their imports right now. And that has made it worse. So there's no reason to feel sorry for this guy. He consciously, maliciously, and willfully has made this situation much worse. And he needs to pay the piper. And his party needs to pay the piper because they're his lackeys and in his cult, and nobody will stand up against him.
Absolutely, we will, and I
We
think
will. There you go. Nobody in the Republican
we
Party
will.
will. It's
Yeah, and I
incredible. These people have no spine. I mean, he's trammeling over things that many of the Republicans have held sacred for decades, and they won't raise a peep against him. I
and I
always
think
think that one of the things members of Congress should do is represent their districts, but they're not at all. He's canceled. Trump has killed probably 300,000 jobs already in the clean energy sectors, in killing solar and wind projects across the country. In my district or my state, he killed a $1 billion investment in hydrogen, to use hydrogen as a clean fuel source. And there's two Republican congressmen who wrote letters to him saying, oh, please, 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 Mr. President, don't kill hundreds of jobs in my district. Well, he went ahead and killed them anyway. But did they actually do anything about that? Did they stand up on their hind feet? Did they decided to say, well, Mr. President, I'm voting against you until you fix this problem? No. They wrote a letter. They were willing to buy a stamp, and that's all they're willing to do. But they're not willing to really stand up against him for things that obviously, clearly, inarguably killed jobs in their districts. These people need to be retired. We need to get some Democrats in there who will stand up for their districts against Trump when he hurts them. And he's hurt them, in so many different ways. He's hurt the agricultural. The soybean growers have been killed because of his tariff policy. Soybean growers lost their entire market in China. And, he tries to buy them off then with money from taxpayers. So you look what he did. He killed the soybean markets. The soybean farmers lost all their markets. And these are like 90% of their income. You're just out of business. And then he turns out, so it raised prices on food. Then he turns around and said, now I'm going to take money away from taxpayers to pay the soybean farmers to try to cover some of their losses. So we end up having higher food prices and higher taxes as a result of his brain dead policies. And Americans have figured this out. That's one of the reasons they rejected him, both on clean energy and general tariff policies as well last Tuesday.
And it's funny, it's not funny, the piece of legislation that Trump and Republicans did pass in Congress, the one big, beautiful bill, it hurt healthcare, it hurt food assistance, it hurt energy prices. And to your point, this is a unifying message that we're seeing. Democrats are fighting and standing with the people here. And our candidates last Tuesday leaned into that, into what Americans know and can see with their own eyes. And I think, to your point, continuing to do that this next year, getting some of these Republicans who won't stand up to Donald Trump out of office is something that I know you at Climate Power and us at the DNC are laser focused on.
Well, we are, and I'm working with the Climate Power Group to talk about these energy issues. And the other thing about this is that when it comes to energy, it really should not be an ideological issue. It should just be based on common sense and practical considerations. How do you get the cheapest, more accessible, and cleanest electrons? If you look at it from an ideological lens, you make some really poor decisions. And that's what Trump has done. He has an ideological lens that says wind turbines are bad and solar panels are bad and batteries are bad. He has this fixation, as I would call it, a phobia, actually. So he's making decisions based on some kind of weird ideological bent. What Americans like is common sense, practical decisions, like practically in the real world. All I want is cheap electrons. I don't want to sort of argue whether they're Democrat or Republican electrons or red or blue or, or what faith they're in. We just want electrons. And if you make decisions based on that, you would allow the continuation of the growth of our clean energy economy in solar, wind, advanced batteries, fusion. We have fusion power coming on now in our state. We may have the first fusion-powered non-nuclear waste generating totally clean energy coming on. So if you just make these practical decisions, things will do well. And that's why Americans responded, because in this case, Democrats we're not making ideological decisions. We're making decisions like when you go to the hardware store, you just buy the best tool that's available. And I think that's why it has such an attraction. Now we're also making decisions realizing that our people are getting hurt by climate change, and we are. And I've experienced that, and we've all experienced it. I had 2 whole towns burned down while I was governor. We've had forest fires double in the West because of aridity and temperature. We've had floods all across America. We had those horrible loss of the young people in the camp down in Texas. We've increased hurricane activity. It's all across America. Tribal communities in Alaska have been destroyed by flooding recently. We've lost lives because of heat. We lost 150 people due to heat stroke in Seattle, Washington. You know, Seattle's the evergreen state. We have a little rain here on occasion. We lost over 150 people due to heat stroke. And we have an epidemic of asthma because of pollution coming from fossil fuels. There's one party that really wants to follow the science on this, and one party that is following Donald Trump over the cliff, denying climate change. And I'm proud to be in the party that wants to use our brains to protect our children from asthma and our families from fires and floods by reducing carbon dioxide emissions and at the same time growing our jobs. Most Americans get this. Trump and the Republicans do not. And again, it's because they're unwilling to stand up against the polluting industries. Look, people get this. In my state, we adopted a thing called the Climate Commitment Act that reduces pollution and uses money from this auction to help Americans get access to heat pumps and solar panels and electric school buses. And when the Republicans tried to repeal this last November, Washingtonians supported it 62 to 38. Talk about a landslide.
Wow.
And because, again, we're making practical decisions helping Washingtonians get access to these clean energy sources. And it's been very, very successful. We need to do that across the nation. We have 24 states now led by, or 23 led by Democratic governors, all of whom are taking action to reduce carbon pollution and help in the fight against climate change. This
It
is
is
a
time.
heartening thing. And I wish we had some Republicans to help us. We don't. Until then, they just need to be retired. They can go play golf and we'll run the country.
I agree. Let's elect some Democrats. Governor Jay Inslee, thank you so much for the work you did when you were governor and across the country, and then with Climate Power. We really appreciate it. And I think the mandate that we heard from Americans last week is very clear, and we need to keep electing Democrats to do this. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.